Welcome to The Needle, your Division I college basketball podcast. I'm Jack Williams, owner and operator of D1CoachCorner.com, your source for college basketball news, rankings, and predictions. On this podcast, we will present to you weekly conversations on D1 college basketball coaches and their teams. Don't forget to go right now on your computer, phone, or tablet and follow us on Twitter. This episode of The Needle is brought to you by D1CoachCorner.com, your source for Division I college basketball coaching.
Thank you once again for tuning into our 22nd episode of The Needle. Again, my name is Jack Williams, owner and operator of D1CoachCorner.com, your source for college basketball news, rankings, and predictions. D1 Coach Corner is the number one source for college basketball preseason predictions and college basketball coach evaluations. The Needle College Basketball Podcast will bring to you 52 weeks of college basketball talks on topics dealing with Division I college basketball coaches and their teams. In this episode of The Needle, we'll be looking at our transfers from the previous season, our graduate transfers to see how big of an impact they've had on Division I college basketball, and then our coaching changes segment of the show. We will also bring to you our new coach impact, which will highlight coaches who have recently taken over a team and has positively impacted the team as a result of him being there. If you like our show, go subscribe to our iTunes and YouTube channels. Let us continue to be your source for preseason college basketball predictions and coach evaluations. Now on to our topic at hand, the graduate transfers impact on the 2018-2019 season. The NCAA study showed that in 2017, the number of graduate transfer in men's sports is 4 times what it was in 2011. The study reported that 2.1% of our current basketball players were graduate transfers. So that means out of 4,589 Division I college basketball players, only 96 of them were graduate transfers. And in college football, the number was much lower than that. The NCAA report shows that only 0.5% of Division I college football players were graduate transfers. So why was the NCAA administrators trying to change the graduate transfer rule again? That's a really small number of players affected. So what we're going to do in this episode is look at some teams in college basketball, in particular the Major Six conferences, and see what type of an impact that they've had on Division I college basketball. Now let's look at some graduate transfers from the 2018-2019 season while we're still on that subject. What type of an impact did they have? We are going to look at 2 power conferences, the SEC and the Big 12, to get a sample of how the graduate transfer had an effect on the teams in their conferences, starting with Coach John Calipari's Kentucky team. Kentucky's John Calipari was not a big fan of the graduate transfer for some reason or another. He hardly ever recruited them prior to last season. But because of the changing rules regarding freshmen and the NBA, and also student athletes and the new transfer rules, he's practically forced to have to rely on a grad transfer or two to fill his roster. At the end of the season, he's stuck with trying to figure out who is returning and who is not. You see, a coach can't rely on a freshman alone. He needs some experience on the roster if he's going to lead his team deep into the postseason. But now that a student athlete can hire an agent without being penalized, more and more freshmen are jetting for the pros, even if their names aren't on the NBA radar. And that's a problem for Coach Calipari. It's a problem because he has no clue as to who's returning to the team or who's going to keep his name in the pros. So what do you do if you can't afford to wait that long? You bring in a couple of graduate transfers. In 2018-2019, he brought on power forward Reed Travis from Stanford. So how did Reed Travis do? He played in 32 games and started in 28. He had 4 20-plus games prior to conference competition. He averaged 11.2 points and 7.2 rebounds per game. He was also very instrumental in the postseason. To add on to that, Kentucky finished in the Sweet 16 of the NCAA tournament. Not bad. Therefore, the graduate transfer worked out for him. I guess that it worked out so well that Coach Calipari in 2019-2020 has decided to invest in another graduate transfer once again with Bucknell's graduate transfer Nate Sestina. Sestina was the second best scorer at Bucknell in 2018-2019. He averaged 15.8 points, 8.5 rebounds, and 1.2 assists per game. Sestina is a big man just like Reed Travis. He's also 6'8", and I'm pretty sure that we'll be seeing him in the starting lineup. Can we see more than one graduate transfer on Kentucky's roster in 2019-2020? Kentucky has 4 scholarships remaining, and I'm pretty sure that most of his freshmen will be keeping their names in the NBA draft. Kentucky doesn't use the traditional way of building a team, which is to get old and stay old. He'll keep a couple of layovers here and there just to have some experience for depth purposes. But his niche is the one and done, and the graduate transfer is just a one and done in reverse. Another team that utilized the graduate transfer in the SEC in 2018-2019 was Texas A&M. Despite their dismal record, Texas A&M got a lot of production out of graduate transfer big man Christian Mokowulu. Mokowulu started in all 32 games last season and averaged 8.3 points and 6.4 rebounds per game. He was the 9th best rebounder in the SEC, but Mokowulu wasn't enough to keep Texas A&M out of the basement of the SEC. Graduate transfer Trey Campbell worked out well for South Carolina, especially after the freshman guard T.J. Moss was sidelined early in the season due to a high ankle sprain. Campbell played in 32 games and started in 29. He averaged 7.1 points and 2.7 assists per game that season. These were your grad transfers in the SEC. Not many, but what each of them added was quality minutes and were instrumental in keeping their teams competitive. Now looking at the Big 12, nobody utilized the graduate transfer system better than Coach Beard at Texas Tech. This is how he won quickly in Little Rock, and this is how he is winning in Texas Tech right now. Coach Beard is one of the very few coaches to have 2 graduate transfers in his starting lineup. Shooting guard Matt Mooney transferred from South Dakota, and power forward Tariq Owens graduate transferred from St. John's. Both fit into the Beard system perfectly. The both of them were high energy and very good defenders in their own right. Owens was the 2nd best rebounder in the Big 12 last season. He also averaged 8.7 points and 5.8 rebounds per game. Matt Mooney was the 2nd best in the Big 12 in steals behind Barry Brown Jr. of Kansas State. He was also Texas Tech's 3rd best scorer. However, for the first time since watching Coach Beard's rosters, he's going to be dependent on several top-ranked freshmen to move this team forward in 2019-2020. There'll be a couple of transfers on the roster, but I don't believe that there's a graduate transfer on the roster as of yet. But he still should have 2 scholarships still available after losing Jared Covert to the pros. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does with the 2 scholarships. He could probably use a couple of more big men after the loss of Tariq Owens and Norense Odiase. The question is he going to go back to his niche in utilizing the grad transfer? Baylor's point guard, Makai Mason, a graduate transfer from Yale, played a huge role in Baylor making it to the NCAA tournament. With so many new players, Baylor needed Mason's experience. Mason really found his place under Coach Drew's system. He flourished in Coach Drew's motion offense. He averaged 14.9 points, 2.5 rebounds, and 3.4 assists per game, almost similar to his freshman year numbers. Baylor finished in the 2nd round of the NCAA tournament. Prior to his injury, Mason helped Yale to win his first NCAA tournament appearance in 54 years. He was Yale's leading scorer in 2015 and 2016. He averaged 16 points, 2.8 rebounds, and 3.8 assists per game that season. In conclusion, a graduate transfer is a very good tool for a Division I college basketball coach. The coach can immediately fill a need that a coach has now. In addition, the graduate transfer has earned his stripes and has earned the right to play a large role on a major Division I team. You see, he may never get the opportunity to play in the NBA, but at least he'll get the opportunity to live his dream, to play for a major Division I team, being in the spotlight, and to possibly win an NCAA tournament championship. There is no real problem with the graduate transfer, just one person who believes that a grad transfer should actually receive his graduate degree. But that's not our choice. It's the choice of the graduate transfer. And if he decides that he doesn't want to continue with his graduate degree after winning a national championship, that's his prerogative. And so much for that. Now let's look to a few coaching changes and additions for 2019. As for assistant coaches, Ohio men's basketball team has added Kyle Barlow as an assistant coach. Barlow entered his first season with the Bobcats after spending the last 5 seasons at Toledo. Georgia State's head coach Rob Lanier announced the first 2 assistant coaches on his staff with the additions of Chris Kreider and Cliff Warren. Chris Holtman, head coach of the Buckeyes, announced the hiring of Jake Diebler, who most recently was an assistant coach at Vanderbilt, to the Ohio State staff as an assistant coach. The University of Toledo's men's basketball coach Todd Kowalczyk announced the hiring of former Ohio State standout Walter Offutt as an assistant coach. The University of Oklahoma head coach, Coach Lon Kruger, announced the addition of Jim Molinari as assistant coach. Now, that concludes the needle moving portion of our show. We'll now get into some coaching news and our new Coach Impact segment of our show. This portion of our show is brought to you by D1CoachCorner.com, your source for college basketball news, rankings, and prediction. Once again, don't forget to go follow us on Twitter after the show at D1 Coach Corner and subscribe to our YouTube and iTunes channels. Now, let's get into a little coaching news. The University of Miami's basketball coach, Coach Jim Larrañaga, announced that Keith Stone would join the program for the 2019-2020 season as a graduate transfer. Gonzaga men's basketball coach, Coach Mark Few, announced the signing of Omar Ballo to a national letter of intent. The University of Minnesota's head coach, Coach Richard Pitino, announced the addition of four-star 6'9" forward from Böblingen, Germany, Isaiah Ihnen. Coach Bill Self got some very good news last Monday. Center Udoka Azubuike announced that he will be returning for his senior year at Kansas. Azubuike played in only 9 games last season before suffering a wrist injury at the beginning of the season. Tennessee gives Coach Burns a contract extension. Burns is set to earn $26 million over the next 5 years. Burns came close to leaving Tennessee for UCLA, but the buyout was too expensive. Tennessee did a good job securing their man. Virginia's championship team turned down an invitation to visit the White House, which has been an ongoing tradition for many championship teams. Shameful. Illinois landed 4-star big man Kofi Cockburn, a 6'11" center from Oak Hill Academy. LSU's new athletic director, Scott Woodard, says that he's 100% supportive of Coach Will Wade's reinstatement. Now for a little college basketball tad bit to discuss. Let's talk a little on the topic of Virginia not visiting the White House after winning the national championship. I know some people say, what's wrong with that? They have a right to express themselves. Well, I'll tell you what's wrong. The visiting of the White House by championship teams started way back in the early 1920s. Many presidents of the United States invited athletes to the White House to show that they appreciate winners and those who strive to be great. Teamwork, confidence, dominance, and persistence are all part of the American fabric. So it's a great thing when our young men and women display this dominance and become champions. We often ask these same young men and women to go around the world and display this dominance in competitions with other countries, whether it's through the Olympics or the World Games. And when we display that dominance to the world, it lets other countries know that we are still one of the strongest countries in the world. The greatest part about our sports teams is that many of them are made up of people of different walks of life: black, white, Hispanics, Christians, Muslims, and other various political beliefs. However, when it comes down to sports, those differences are no longer recognized. People are only focused on the team, our young men and women who play the game, and the love of the game. Those differences should also be put aside when a championship team is invited to the White House, because no matter how many growing pains that our country has gone through to get to this point, in the end, this is still a great country. The presidency and the White House represents the freedom that we all have today, to be whatever we want, to be as great as we want to be, no matter what politics we practice. It doesn't matter who's in the White House. It's the position that we should respect. Now on to our new Coach Impact segment of our show. In this new Coach Impact segment of our show, we'll be discussing coaches who have been head coach of a particular Division I basketball team for no more than 5 years and who are on the upward trend towards taking that team to another level. This week's new Coach Impact highlights Coach Tom Crean of Georgia. Georgia currently has the 11th best recruiting class in the country, according to Rivals.com, which includes 5-star shooting guard Anthony Grant, who is a native of Georgia. Tom Crean has this Georgia team ready to move up in a growing SEC in 2019 and 2020. Expect Georgia to be a very competitive team in the SEC next season. Now, that concludes our show for this week. Join us next week at the same time and channel for new episodes. We'll be happy to take your questions and comments on Twitter for our next episode. Our Twitter handle is at D1 Coach Corner. That is at D1 Coach Corner. See you next week.